Natalie Caldwell thought her tumultuous divorce from Ethan Sinclair was the absolute end of all heartbreak. For months, she had existed in a state of emotional paralysis, feeling as though she had already walked barefoot through the fire. She had been burned by his callous betrayal, scorched by the public humiliation of their uncoupling, and left standing alone in the gray ashes of a love she once truly believed was unshakable. She had endured the crushing weight of his betrayal, the burning shame of endless gossip circulating in their ritzy San Francisco social circle, and the sharp, visceral sting of watching her ex-husband casually flaunt his newfound life of luxury with a seductive, much younger mistress constantly at his side. Every glossy magazine headline, every whispered conversation abruptly halted. When she walked into a charity gala, every paparazzi photo of Ethan draped comfortably in another woman's embrace had been a fresh, agonizing wound. It hurt with a blinding intensity until, purely out of survival, she forced herself to feel absolutely nothing at all. She built walls of ice around her heart, dedicating her waking hours to work just to drown out the noise. But now, months later, a chance encounter in the glittering, opulent hall of a five-star restaurant is about to overturn everything they thought was permanently settled. Because on the very night Ethan struts in with his new mistress on his arm, exuding the suffocating arrogance of a man who firmly believes he has won the ultimate prize in life, he finds Natalie. She is not just surviving, she is thriving. He sees her laughing brightly across the table from a powerful billionaire CEO. She is not lonely. She is not broken. She is radiant. And that sudden realization hits Ethan Sinclair like a brutal, breathless punch to the gut. Tonight, sparks will fly. Old and tender wounds will violently tear open, and shocking secrets of the human heart will finally surface. To understand the magnitude of this collision, one must understand where they began. Natalie Caldwell had been raised with all the right manners, attended all the right exclusive schools, and lived with every societal expectation that she would lead a picture-perfect, seamless life. Her parents, Jonathan and Elaine Caldwell, had built a very comfortable, highly respected existence in Los Angeles, ensuring that Natalie never wanted for anything, be it material, comforts, or emotional support. She was raised to be a woman who inspired envy, not pity, a wife to be cherished and valued, not discarded like yesterday's news. But life, with its cruel sense of irony, had other plans. Ironically, it was that exact same well-heeled, privileged background that originally brought her directly into the orbit of Ethan Sinclair. At the time, Ethan was a charming, fiercely ambitious man from a distinctly modest upbringing. In the Midwest, a man who was absolutely determined to climb the steep social and financial ladders of the West Coast. They first met at a lavish charity gala, hosted at the Pacific Heights Club in San Francisco. The room was a dizzying swirl of crystal chandeliers, flowing designer gowns, and endless trays of Vintage champagne. Ethan was an up-and-coming tech entrepreneur at the time, brimming with a restless, magnetic energy that commanded attention. When their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, there was an instant, undeniable spark. Natalie found his relentless drive and hungry ambition deeply refreshing, a stark and exciting contrast to the lazy, entitled airs and trust fund boys she so often encountered in her circles. He spoke with passion about changing the world, and he made her feel entirely alive, like she was, boldly stepping into a sweeping love story that defied all conventional expectations. He, for his part, deeply admired her flawless poise, her quiet intelligence, and her effortless insider connections that could open doors he had previously only dreamed of walking through. They were, on paper, an unlikely duo, but for a few sweet, golden years, it truly seemed they were building an unstoppable, true partnership. They ate cheap, take out on the floor of his cramped first office, dreaming of the future. But success, as it so often does, can be a dangerous, double-edged sword. Ethan's software tech startup eventually soared far beyond their wildest, most ambitious dreams, completely transforming him into a rising, undeniable star among the elite venture capitalists of Silicon Valley. He soon became a multimillionaire, constantly hobnobbing with A-list celebrities and ruthless financiers, always hustling at a breakneck pace to sign the next massive deal. Slowly but surely, the fundamental fabric of their marriage began to fray. The attentive man who once whispered sweet promises about forever in her ear late at night began speaking only of lucrative stock options, aggressive corporate acquisitions, and dominating market shares. As his massive fortune grew, so did the crushing professional pressures and the intoxicating, glittering temptations of his new world. Natalie couldn't pinpoint the exact, fatal moment their marriage cracked, but she knew it started with late-night executive meetings that conveniently bled into weekend-long business trips. At first, she had gently told herself it was perfectly normal, that all great, successful men had to make difficult sacrifices, and that she could be the strong, patient wife standing behind him. But over time, Ethan's once warm, loving gaze toward her cooled into a rigid, distant politeness. They lived in the same sprawling penthouse, yet they were oceans apart. When the ugly rumors of his infidelity first reached Natalie's ears, whispered by well-meaning friends over afternoon tea, she fiercely dismissed them as petty, jealous gossip. She was his wife. After all, she was his foundational partner, the loyal woman who had firmly believed in him long before the rest of the world even knew his name. She desperately wanted to believe that Ethan was still the exact same man who used to send her silly, romantic text messages from across a crowded room just to say he loved her. But dark lies have an insidious way of seeping through even the thickest, strongest walls. By their fourth wedding anniversary, She could simply no longer deny the glaring changes in him. She could no longer ignore the prolonged absences, the heavy secrecy surrounding his phone, the unexplained credit card charges, and the lingering, sweet perfume on his collar that most certainly wasn't hers. Friends whispered quietly about a mysterious, long-legged woman, frequently spotted riding shotgun in Ethan's luxury sports car, or a pair of extravagantly sexy, red-soled heels found casually kicked off in his private penthouse office. With each passing day, the deep, suffocating sense of betrayal deepened until it consumed her entirely. A year ago, after a series of tearful, screaming confrontations and painful, unavoidable revelations, they finally divorced. The legal battle was surprisingly brief and clinically cold. Ethan offered a massive, substantial financial settlement right out of the gate, acting exactly as if throwing enough money at the problem could effortlessly wash away his profound guilt. Embittered, humiliated, and utterly heartbroken, Natalie packed her bags and moved back to her parents' sprawling estate in Los Angeles for a while, desperately needing to lick her deep wounds in relative privacy. The hungry tabloids quickly caught wind of the messy divorce, gleefully painting it across their covers as just another classic fairy tale union gone hopelessly sour in the fast-paced world of tech billionaires. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath of the split, Ethan seemed to loudly revel in his newly reclaimed bachelor status, constantly papped by aggressive photographers leaving exclusive nightclubs and five-star resorts. He was typically seen with a statuesque, striking brunette firmly attached to his arm. Her name, it soon turned out, was Vanessa Hayes. She was an aspiring, Instagram-famous model from a small, forgettable town, a woman absolutely hungry for a permanent taste of the good life. She clung to Ethan in every paparazzi photo, posing with sultry, manufactured expressions that served as a stark, glaring contrast to Natalie's much more refined, understated style. Natalie tried her absolute hardest to ignore the endless swirl of toxic rumors about exactly how happy and liberated Ethan supposedly was. Instead of wallowing, she forced herself to focus entirely on rebuilding her shattered life. From the ground up, she packed away her tears, moved back to San Francisco into a beautiful, quiet townhouse, and took a demanding new job coordinating massive philanthropic events for a major international NGO, throwing herself completely into her charity work. She organized galas, silent auctions, and global outreach programs. In those busy volunteer circles, she finally found a renewed sense of true purpose that slowly, effectively dulled the sharp, lingering sting of her broken marriage. Still, no amount of grand philanthropic triumphs or deeply supportive friends could entirely banish the hurt that lived in her chest. In quiet, lonely moments, usually late at night with a glass of wine in hand, she remembered how she and Ethan had once vividly daydreamed about traveling the world together. raising a house full of children, and forging massive philanthropic endeavors of their own. Now, all that remained of those beautiful dreams was a long string of bitter regrets and a heavy, white gold wedding band gathering dust in the very back of her velvet jewelry box. It was during the meticulous planning of one of those massive philanthropic events that her path unexpectedly crossed with Ryan Whitaker. Ryan was a staggeringly handsome and completely self-made CEO who owned an international, highly lucrative chain of high-end boutique hotels. Natalie was currently in the trenches of planning a massive, high-stakes fundraiser for an underfunded children's education charity, and Ryan's massive corporate conglomerate had generously pledged a highly significant, multi-million-dollar donation to the cause. Over several intensive weeks of close collaboration, Ryan quickly proved himself to be vastly more than just another aloof, arrogant businessman writing a tax-deductible check. He was surprisingly, refreshingly down to earth, possessing a warm, genuine kind smile that always reached his expressive hazel eyes. Though Natalie was incredibly wary of wealthy, powerful alpha types after her traumatic ordeal with Ethan, Ryan's deeply respectful, consistent attentiveness slowly but surely chipped away at her heavy emotional defenses. He listened when she spoke. He valued her professional input, and he never once made her feel small. One evening, after a wildly successful charity gala that exceeded all their fundraising goals, Ryan gently asked her to join him for dinner to celebrate. She hesitated for a long moment, feeling that familiar, terrifying pang of romantic vulnerability. But something about Ryan's calm sincerity made her take a leap of faith and say yes. She strictly vowed to herself to keep it entirely casual, just two focused professionals celebrating a job very well done. She had absolutely no inkling that this simple celebration dinner would soon become the explosive stage for a dramatic, unforgettable confrontation. Nor did she ever suspect that her arrogant ex-husband and his flashy new mistress would be dining in the very same exclusive restaurant, causing their vastly different worlds to violently collide in a way neither party had ever foreseen. Truly, none of them could have ever anticipated the chaos that awaited them. High-end, Michelin-starred restaurants in San Francisco often boasted incredibly opulent decor, but Le Jardin took luxury to an entirely different, almost unfathomable level. The legendary establishment was globally known for its real gold leaf ceiling, its massive, hand-blown Venetian glass chandeliers, and an exclusive waiting list that could easily stretch for 6 to 8 months. Wealthy patrons eagerly shelled out thousands of dollars for a single multi-course meal, savoring intricate, artful plates meticulously prepared by a world-renowned, Michelin-starred chef. For the city's elite class, dining at Le Jardin wasn't just about enjoying a restaurant, it was making a loud, definitive statement. It was a highly visible place where absolute power dined, where massive fortunes were casually flaunted over cocktails, and where physical appearances and social standing ultimately mattered significantly more than the Exquisite food on the porcelain plate. Ethan Sinclair confidently walked through the heavy mahogany doors with Vanessa, Hayes clinging tightly to his arm. He was well accustomed to turning heads and commanding attention in such intimidating environments. And tonight was absolutely no exception. Dressed impeccably in a sleek, custom-tailored Italian suit that cost more than a standard car, he exuded the potent, almost suffocating confidence of a man who believed he had entirely conquered the business world. He carried himself with the practiced, arrogant ease of someone who had spent long years perfecting the visual role of success. Every single physical gesture was meticulously measured, every sweeping glance around the room was highly calculated. The impeccably dressed hostess, instantly recognizing him as a high net worth VIP client, immediately offered a deferential smile and personally escorted them to an exclusive, highly coveted corner table situated perfectly near the massive panoramic window overlooking the glittering, sprawling city skyline. Ethan felt a warm flush of supreme pride wash over him as other diners discreetly glanced their way. It was a tangible, intoxicating reminder of his own soaring success. The low murmur of admiration, the subtle, respectful nods from other powerful, wealthy men across the dining room, it was all essential fuel for the grand image he had so meticulously built for himself. Vanessa, draped seductively in a figure-hugging, plunging black designer gown that left very little to the imagination, delicately sipped from a crystal glass of vintage champagne. She constantly cast a wide-eyed, adoring gaze at Ethan, completely and deliberately aware that half the dining room was secretly watching them. This was precisely the kind of glamorous, untouchable life she had always deeply coveted growing up. Caviar, endless champagne, and a ridiculously wealthy partner who eagerly showered her with lavish, wildly expensive gifts. To Vanessa, luxury wasn't just about physical comfort, it was her ultimate validation as a human being. She deeply savored every single second of it, from the reverent hush of the maitre d's voice when addressing them, to the chaotic swirl of flashing paparazzi cameras who sometimes lurked aggressively outside the restaurant's velvet ropes. She desperately wanted to be envied by other women. She wanted to be desired by other men. She wanted the entire world to clearly see that she had successfully secured her permanent place directly beside a powerful man like Ethan Sinclair. As they lazily browsed the leather-bound menu, casually discussing their upcoming, wildly expensive trip to the sun-drenched beaches of St. Bart's, Vanessa discreetly angled her latest smartphone to snap a quick, carefully framed selfie. She knew exactly how to expertly capture the absolute perfect shot, her new massive diamond tennis bracelet catching the flickering candlelight, Ethan's strong, chiseled profile slightly blurred in the background, and a subtle, triumphant smirk playing on her red lips. Exactly as if to say to her followers, "This is my life now." Ethan noticed the camera and gently but firmly took her hand, pulling the phone down quietly cautioning her to keep a low, respectable profile, while he absolutely reveled in his corporate success. He strongly preferred carefully managed, highly polished PR publicity, especially after the exhausting, highly public fiasco of his messy divorce from Natalie. Vanessa visibly pouted her lips, annoyed by the restriction, but she quickly complied, sliding the phone away. She possessed enough cunning to understand that the real, ultimate prize was continuing her lucrative association with him, not securing a fleeting, viral social media post. Ethan wasn't just another rich boyfriend to discard. He was her permanent stepping stone to the exact kind of life she had always dreamed of living. Meanwhile, entirely on the other side of the massive, glittering restaurant, another hostess was graciously guiding Ryan Whitaker and Natalie Caldwell to a similarly exclusive, highly coveted table. Ryan, possessing the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who had built a massive empire entirely from scratch, wore a perfectly tailored, classic navy suit. Unlike Ethan's highly curated, almost aggressive physical presence, Ryan's confidence was beautifully effortless. It was completely unaffected by any desperate need to impress the people around him. He simply knew his worth. Natalie glided gracefully beside him, dressed in an elegant, flowing deep blue gown that perfectly highlighted her natural figure without being overly ostentatious or desperate for attention. She looked absolutely breathtaking, but not in a loud way that aggressively demanded the room's attention. Rather, she carried an undeniable aura of quiet, profound strength, the specific, radiant beauty of a woman who had been completely broken down by life and had meticulously, bravely rebuilt herself stronger than before. She felt a swirling mix of genuine excitement and faint, lingering nerves. Ryan was not only an incredibly supportive, generous philanthropic partner, but he was also a man she found increasingly, undeniably intriguing. There was a beautiful steadiness to his character, a kind of rock-solid reliability that felt completely foreign and incredibly comforting after surviving the toxic chaos of her marriage to Ethan. The secluded table Ryan had reserved was situated near the center of the main dining room, giving them a perfect, unobstructed view of the flamboyant, theatrical setting around them. Soft, warm candlelight danced beautifully across the highly polished silver cutlery as they comfortably settled into their plush velvet chairs. Neither of them heard or noticed the sharp, sudden inhale of breath that came from a table directly across the crowded room. Neither of them saw the exact, defining moment. Ethan Sinclair casually turned his head to survey the room and completely, utterly froze, unaware of the eyes burning into her. Natalie folded her hands gracefully on her lap, steeling herself for a wonderful evening. She remained calm and poised. She deeply sensed that Ryan's dinner invitation might actually represent something significantly more than just a casual, celebratory meal. But she honestly wasn't entirely sure if her bruised heart was truly ready for anything deeper. There. Dinner conversation began with very light, easy banter about the highly successful charity fundraiser, eventually drifting organically into Ryan's ambitious corporate plans to rapidly expand his luxury hotel chain into the Asian market. Natalie happily chimed in, utilizing her expertise, referencing the massive philanthropic outreach programs currently operating in those specific regions. Her beautiful eyes lit up with genuine, infectious passion as she vividly described the immense potential for corporate charity partnerships. Ryan sat back, deeply captivated. He found her raw passion completely infectious and beautiful. It was such an incredibly refreshing, shocking change from the endless parade of vapid socialites and calculating gold diggers he'd constantly encountered during his steep climb to CEO status. Natalie didn't care about his money, she cared about his impact. Halfway through their exquisite amuse-bouche, Ryan gently raised his crystal glass, offering her a sincere toast. "To you, Natalie," he said, his voice a warm, smooth baritone, "for actively reminding me that the world of business can actually be about so much more than just the bottom line and profit margins. You've truly helped me see exactly how much tangible good we can do for children's education worldwide." Natalie's cheeks warmed with a beautiful, natural blush. "You give me far too much credit, Ryan. I merely help connect the right, generous donors with the right, deserving causes." Their crystal glasses clinked softly together, producing a pure, ringing tone. For a long, suspended moment, their eyes locked in an unspoken, profound acknowledgement that something significantly deeper and more meaningful connected them than mere professional corporate synergy. Natalie actually felt her heart flutter against her ribs, a light, hopeful sensation she hadn't experienced since well before the dark days of her divorce. As she looked into his hazel eyes, she realized that perhaps she was finally ready to safely explore new, romantic possibilities after all. On the opposite side of the restaurant, however, dark, ugly tensions were rapidly brewing. Vanessa, constantly scanning the dining room with the practiced, calculating cunning of an expert social climber, suddenly stiffened. In her seat, she thought she recognized a familiar face from the tabloids. Leaning eagerly across the table, her eyes glittering with the promise of drama, she murmured to Ethan, "Is that your boring ex-wife over there by the massive center floral arrangement?" Ethan's dark gaze immediately followed Vanessa's pointed look. When his eyes finally landed, and he clearly saw Natalie's familiar, beautiful profile, elegantly poised sitting directly beside a man he instantly recognized as Ryan Whitaker, the immensely powerful billionaire hotel magnate. A massive wave of absolute shock rippled violently through his entire body. The quiet, devoted ex-wife he had so callously and arrogantly tossed aside like an old coat was actually here. She was dressed to the nines, looking more beautiful than he remembered, and she was smiling warmly, intimately, at a man who completely and utterly dwarfed Ethan in both net worth and global influence. A sharp, violent pang of highly unexpected, burning jealousy instantly coiled tight in his chest, immediately followed by a confusing, toxic mixture of hot anger and undeniable intrigue, desperately trying to mask his swirling, chaotic emotions from his mistress. Ethan forced a dry, hollow chuckle. Wow. What an incredibly small world, he said, though his own voice sounded strained and incredibly tight to his own ears. This was absolutely no random, casual coffee shop or cheap neighborhood bistro. Le Jardin was an impenetrable fortress of extreme exclusivity. The people who dined within these gilded walls were among the absolute elite of the elite. The absolute last person on earth Ethan wanted to see tonight was Natalie. And he, especially, vehemently did not want to see her sitting happily in the company of someone as vastly influential, respected, and incredibly wealthy as Ryan Whitaker. Vanessa arched a perfectly manicured, thin eyebrow, an almost feline, wicked grin curling her red lips. Maybe we should go over and say hello to them, she suggested, her tone dripping thickly with a highly toxic, false innocence. After all, it's only polite society manners to warmly greet an ex-spouse and her friend. Ethan quickly drained the rest of his expensive champagne flute in one large gulp, seeking courage. We'll see, he muttered darkly, aggressively eyeing Natalie's table with rapidly mounting, undeniable unease. If there was one specific thing in this world that Ethan Sinclair absolutely despised more than anything else, it was the feeling of being overshadowed and outclassed. And Ryan Whitaker's mere physical presence threatened exactly that. It wasn't just that Ryan was incredibly wealthy, Ethan was wealthy too. Of course. But there was something infuriatingly, effortlessly superior about the relaxed, confident way Ryan carried himself. He moved exactly as if massive power and global influence were just his natural second nature. Completely unforced. It made Ethan's own carefully curated, highly practiced confidence suddenly feel incredibly fake, entirely forced, and strangely hollow. A petty, childish part of Ethan desperately wanted to march right over to their table and aggressively stake a territorial claim on his social territory. But his business mind realized that any such loud, public confrontation could spiral downward incredibly quickly. He could already vividly see the embarrassing tabloid headlines flashing in his mind. Tech billionaire meltdown at Le Jardin. Jealous ex causes massive scene over former wife. He was absolutely not going to allow himself to be painted as that pathetic, out-of-control man. As the highly trained waitstaff flitted silently around the dining room like ghosts, seamlessly delivering sumptuous, steaming plates of seared Wagyu beef and rich lobster risotto. Two entirely separate tables unknowingly braced for a massive, emotional collision. Natalie still had absolutely no clue that Ethan was there, sitting mere steps away, feeling the scorching, burning sting of intense envy. She was far too happily caught up in the easy, flowing rhythm of her conversation with Ryan, her genuine laugh ringing out into the room like a beautiful melody Ethan hadn't heard in years. Ryan, meanwhile, remained completely and blissfully unaware that the arrogant CEO of a tech startup, who also happened to be his date's cruel ex-husband, was intensely studying their every single move from afar. In just a few short moments, this carefully curated, perfectly controlled world of ultra-fine dining would completely descend into a messy swirl of dark, old resentments and highly dangerous new temptations. The night was still very young, and sparks were about to fly in dramatic, explosive ways that absolutely none of them could have ever predicted. Ethan's entire physical body felt completely on edge, humming with negative energy. He simply couldn't stop himself. He kept compulsively glancing over toward Natalie's table, desperately attempting to accurately gauge the exact intimacy level between his ex-wife and Ryan Whitaker. Was this just a late business dinner celebrating their charity work? Or was it the start of something significantly more romantic? The deeply attentive way Ryan physically leaned in when she spoke, the comfortable, natural way Natalie tilted her head toward him and smiled, it sent a hot, aggravating prickle of intense irritation straight down Ethan's spine. Vanessa, incredibly keen to aggressively exploit the brewing drama for her own twisted amusement, periodically whispered venomous, running commentary directly into Ethan's ear. They look pretty incredibly cozy together, don't they? She mused aloud, her voice dripping with malicious amusement. Or perhaps he must just be paying for all those massive diamonds she's currently wearing. She was specifically referring to the delicate, exquisite diamond drop earrings dangling from Natalie's ears, earrings that had actually once been a highly expensive anniversary gift from Ethan himself. A cynical part of him had fully expected never to see her wear them again after the divorce, assuming she would have sold them or thrown them into the ocean. But there they were, glittering brilliantly against Natalie's flawless skin. Did she still choose to wear them because she actually liked them and separated the art from the artist? Or was it simply a matter of the fact that they perfectly matched the elegance of the occasion? The unanswered question gnawed at his ego. Vanessa's knowing, wicked, gnawed at him. Her sly, underhanded remarks sent Ethan's tight jaw into a harder, more painful clench each and every time she spoke. A rational part of him desperately wanted to dismiss the burning jealousy inside him as completely irrational and stupid. After all, wasn't he the one who had proactively ended things, hired the lawyers, and publicly moved on with the younger Vanessa? Wasn't he the one who had firmly, repeatedly told himself that Natalie was nothing more than a closed chapter safely left in his past? Yet, physically seeing Natalie sitting in the glamorous, golden glow of Le Jardin, looking vastly more confident and beautiful than ever before, while sitting intimately beside a man with just as much raw power and wealth, if not significantly more, ignited a dark, fierce possessiveness he hadn't anticipated and couldn't control. She absolutely didn't look like a pathetic, broken woman. slowly recovering from heartbreak. She looked exactly like a powerful woman who had already moved on and upgraded her life. Finally, after uselessly picking at his caviar-studded appetizer without tasting a single bite, Ethan decided he simply could no longer sit there and watch from the sidelines like a cuckold. He abruptly rose from his velvet chair, completely ignoring Vanessa's half-smile of malicious triumph. "I'm going to go over there and say hello," he announced abruptly. Though the words felt incredibly forced and tight even to himself, he spoke them as if saying it out loud to the room could somehow make the impulsive action seem perfectly casual and normal. "I'd like to make an effort to keep things highly civil between us." Vanessa's glossy, red-painted lips twitched upward with sheer, unadulterated amusement. "Civil? My God, how incredibly boring of you," she purred, taking another sip of her drink. "But by all means, darling, go right over there and aggressively stir the pot." She swirled her expensive wine lazily in its glass, watching his retreating back exactly like a bored spectator at a Roman gladiator, show she had been eagerly waiting all night to enjoy. A massive swirl of heavy tension tightly coiled in Ethan's chest as he slowly wound his way through the maze of occupied tables, desperately trying his hardest not to look exactly like a man on a furious mission. His rapid heartbeat drummed loudly in his ears, a highly foreign, uncomfortable sensation of anxiety that he was absolutely not used to feeling. He felt incredibly unsteady, his expensive leather footsteps growing heavier and heavier as he neared the exact center of the dining room. Within seconds, he stood awkwardly near Ryan and Natalie's table. Up close, the dynamic scene was even more deeply intimate than it had appeared from across the room. Ryan was leaning in slightly, his eyes locked entirely on Natalie as she passionately described something that made her eyes light up with vibrant, undeniable passion. Her delicate hand casually brushed the thin crystal stem of her wine glass, her fingers completely relaxed, her facial expression utterly and beautifully at ease. Ethan loudly, intentionally cleared his throat. Natalie's gaze snapped violently upward at the sound. The exact moment she recognized her ex-husband standing over her, her relaxed expression instantly shifted from mild surprise to an absolute, impenetrable composure. The soft veneer of lightness she had shared with Ryan immediately vanished. A cold steel wall sliding firmly into place. For a brief, microscopic second, something raw flickered in her dark eyes, shock, maybe, or a flash of old, buried pain. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was completely gone, instantly replaced by a cool, calculating, entirely unreadable gaze. "Ethan," she said smoothly, barely inclining her head in acknowledgement. "I certainly didn't expect to see you here tonight." Ryan Whitaker, who had been halfway through a deep, warm chuckle, instantly grew completely quiet. His sharp, intelligent hazel eyes flickered with intense curiosity as he quickly, analytically assessed the sudden newcomer standing over their table. He had previously heard vague, polite hints that Natalie's recent, messy divorce had actively involved a wealthy, arrogant tech entrepreneur. But he had never actually met the infamous Ethan Sinclair in person. Maintaining his impeccable manners, offering a polite, measured nod, Ryan gracefully extended a hand. "Good evening to you. I'm Ryan Whitaker." Ethan firmly shook his hand, immediately noting the incredibly strong, solid grip that spoke volumes of Ryan's innate confidence and power. "Ethan Sinclair. I believe we've probably heard each other's names floating around town in various circles," he said, plastering on a fake, corporate smile. But directly beneath the surface of the polite pleasantries, Ethan's dark thoughts churned violently. This is the exact man who's replaced me in Natalie's life. He's sleeping with my wife. Natalie masterfully mustered her absolute calm, refusing to let her heart rate show. "How have you been doing lately, Ethan?" she asked, genuinely, desperately, hoping to keep this highly awkward encounter from turning incredibly ugly in public. She had deeply hoped her ex-husband wouldn't have the audacity to approach their table, but knowing his massive ego, she knew a confrontation of some kind was sadly inevitable. Ethan forced a wider, utterly fake smile. "I've been incredibly busy, as usual. We are aggressively expanding the business into new global sectors." His critical gaze flicked arrogantly around the heavily gilded restaurant before landing squarely back on her face. "I see you're out for a very nice, expensive evening yourselves," he added smoothly, gesturing slightly with his hand as though to deliberately highlight the extreme extravagance of the restaurant that he was so personally familiar with, implying she only belonged there because of the money he had given her in the settlement. Ryan nodded slowly, his sharp intellect absolutely not missing Ethan's slight, passive-aggressive edge. "Yes, we were having a lovely time celebrating a very recent, massive charitable milestone. Natalie here was absolutely instrumental in independently raising crucial funds for some incredible new education initiatives overseas." Ethan's lips tightened into a thin, hard line. He vividly remembered a much simpler time when he and Natalie had happily done small-scale philanthropic work together. But that was a long time ago, before his tech empire ballooned into the stratosphere and his personal time for genuine, unselfish giving completely shrank away. "Well, that's very nice," he offered flatly, the condescension dripping from the word nice. Natalie easily caught the familiar, dark flicker of deep resentment flashing in Ethan's eyes. She intimately recognized that exact, specific look from the miserable last months of their dying marriage, an irrational, toxic anger that aggressively bristled whenever he felt even slightly overshadowed, challenged, or left behind by someone else's success. She tried desperately to maintain her polite, frozen facade, mentally bracing herself for him to say something intentionally cutting or cruel. The absolute last thing she wanted in the world was to cause a trashy, dramatic scene in front of Ryan, or under the highly prying, judgmental eyes of the restaurant's elite, gossiping clientele. Just then, precisely on cue like a villain in a soap opera, Vanessa miraculously appeared directly behind Ethan, intimately hooking her bare arm completely through his. She smiled incredibly sweetly at the table, though her dark eyes gleamed brightly with pure, unadulterated mischief. "Hello there," she said loudly, extending a perfectly manicured, diamond-clad hand down to Ryan. "I'm Vanessa Hayes. I am Ethan's companion." The heavy, deliberate emphasis she placed on the word companion was absolutely not lost on Natalie. Vanessa then slowly turned her gaze to Natalie, a slight, victorious smirk playing on her lips. "And you must be the famous ex-wife. It is such a pleasure to finally meet you in the flesh. I've heard oh so much about you." Natalie remained perfectly, beautifully poised in her seat, even though her stomach violently churned with nausea and rising anger. Natalie instantly recognized Vanessa from the endless, trashy tabloid photos she had been forced to see for months. She was sleek, model-esque, and highly manufactured, the exact kind of shallow woman who thrived like a weed in the blinding spotlight, entirely unbothered by the ugly whispers of scandal that followed her. She was exactly everything that Natalie was fundamentally not. Vanessa was loud where Natalie was quietly restrained. She was brazenly bold where Natalie was elegantly poised. And yet, here they all were, hopelessly tangled together in the exact same messy web. For a brief, agonizing second, a painful image aggressively flashed through Natalie's mind, a photo of Vanessa draped half-naked over Ethan in some glossy, high-end magazine spread, while sleazy reporters openly speculated whether her affair had been the direct reason for the Sinclair divorce. And now, that very same woman was standing mere inches away from her dinner plate, smirking down at her exactly like she had won a grand prize. "Charmed, I'm sure," Natalie said, her voice like ice, forcing herself to remain impeccably civil. Ryan quietly observed the heavy, suffocating tension rolling off the group, his brow furrowing deeply with genuine concern for Natalie. Completely without hesitation, he smoothly reached out and placed a highly supportive, warm hand directly on the small of Natalie's back. It was a very simple, quiet gesture, yet it spoke massive volumes to everyone watching. It was a quiet, undeniable reassurance. It was a physical statement of protection. The intimate gesture absolutely did not go unnoticed by Ethan. His jaw tightened, so hard his teeth ground together. The dark, ugly possessiveness he had fought to suppress all evening violently surged to the surface of his mind, completely unbidden and highly unwelcome. "She used to be mine," a toxic voice whispered in his head. "Well, since we've all formally introduced ourselves, why don't you two just join us at our table for a moment?" Ryan suggested smoothly, utilizing his CEO diplomacy, attempting to politely diffuse the intense, escalating awkwardness. It's absolutely not every single day we run into old friends dining at Le Jardin. Natalie almost literally choked on her sip of champagne. Friends? That was an incredibly generous stretch of the imagination. But she managed to swallow and keep a perfectly pleasant, frozen expression on her face. Ethan, immediately seeing a golden chance to sit down and actively assert some dominance and control over the narrative, quickly and eagerly agreed. Vanessa cast a highly triumphant, nasty glance down at Natalie, looking exactly as though she'd just been invited into a personal boxing ring where she could happily and publicly flaunt her sexual hold on Ethan. Her manicured fingers grazed lightly up and down Ethan's wrist possessively, a highly deliberate, calculated display of ownership. Reluctantly, moving as if she were made of lead, Natalie scooted her velvet chair slightly to the left to make physical space at the table. Her heart pounded furiously against her ribs, her nerves jangling like live wires. This was a massive, terrible mistake. This was a total, unmitigated disaster just waiting to unfold in public. Ryan smoothly signaled a passing waiter to quickly bring extra seats and place settings, inadvertently setting the perfect, cramped stage for a violent swirl of toxic emotions they were all incredibly ill-prepared to handle. As the new, cramped seating arrangement was swiftly finalized by the staff, the luxurious, opulent surroundings grew heavily charged with thick, suffocating tension. The massive, mirrored walls surrounding the dining room perfectly reflected a quartet of beautiful people intimately tied together by messy, bleeding threads of lost love, profound betrayal, and budding new desires. It felt exactly like a cruel, cosmic joke, a perfectly staged, theatrical tableau of incredibly unfinished business. The highly trained waitstaff very discreetly withdrew from the immediate area, professionally sensing the dangerous, palpable friction radiating from the table. The very next words exchanged at that table would permanently shape all of their interconnected futures in dramatic ways absolutely none of them could yet fathom. With the four of them now awkwardly gathered around a single, small candlelit table, Le Jardin's incredible opulence suddenly felt far too close, far too intense, like being locked inside a beautiful, gilded cage. The massive crystal chandeliers hanging directly above them shimmered brightly, casting thousands of fractured, dancing prisms of light across the crystal wine glasses and highly polished silverware. It felt incredibly, almost suffocatingly theatrical, exactly as if they were all unwilling actors trapped in some twisted, psychological social experiment. Natalie sat incredibly stiffly, her spine ramrod straight, desperately wishing she were absolutely anywhere else in the entire world. She could physically feel Ethan's intense, burning gaze constantly flicker back and forth between her face and Ryan, an unspoken, aggressive, masculine challenge crackling in the air between the two men. Yet, as Ryan offered everyone a gracious, relaxed smile and casually signaled the sommelier to bring a fresh round of wine glasses. She quickly realized there was absolutely no graceful, dignified retreat available. To her, to abruptly stand up and leave the restaurant now might fan the already smoldering flames of society gossip, and Natalie Caldwell absolutely refused to ever be known as the weak woman who cowardly ran away from a fight. Vanessa wasted absolutely no time asserting her presence. She leaned heavily forward, purposefully displaying her cleavage, and began batting her false eyelashes at Ryan. "This place is just absolutely stunning, isn't it?" she cooed, her voice pitched artificially high, sounding as sickly sweet as poisoned honey. Then, deploying a mask of calculated, weaponized innocence, she maliciously twisted the knife. "Ethan and I come here to eat all the time. Don't we, darling?" Natalie physically felt the painful impact of the words before her brain even fully processed their meaning. They were sharp, highly deliberate, and explicitly meant to provoke her into showing jealousy. Ethan merely nodded curtly, his dark thoughts visibly focused elsewhere. For once in his life, he wasn't eagerly indulging Vanessa's dramatic theatrics. He was far too intensely preoccupied with obsessively watching Natalie. He kept subtly glancing toward Ryan, aggressively sizing the taller man up, silently comparing the cut of their bespoke suits, measuring their physical presence in the room, evaluating even their smallest mannerisms. He noted the incredibly relaxed, confident way Ryan's long fingers brushed lightly against the delicate stem of his wine glass, looking utterly at ease in his own skin. He hated the intimate, protective way Ryan physically angled his broad shoulders entirely toward Natalie, treating her exactly like she was the absolute only person in the crowded room worth paying any attention to. Ethan absolutely hated all of it. His heart pounded painfully against his ribs with a raw, highly unexpected, burning jealousy he felt at simply seeing Ryan's protective, loving stance toward his ex-wife. Had he ever looked at Natalie that way? He wondered wildly. Had he ever, even in the beginning, made her feel that secure, that completely wanted? Or had he just been far too blindly consumed with endlessly chasing more money, chasing higher status, chasing other women, to ever actually notice the incredible treasure he was actively losing? Trying his best to salvage some basic societal civility, Ryan cleared his throat, steering the conversation to neutral ground. "I've heard from my contacts that the executive chef here is actively crafting an entirely new, highly experimental tasting menu debuting very soon. Perhaps we should all come back and sample it sometime," he offered. It was a perfectly neutral topic, a polite conversational lifeline. But beneath the polished, wealthy words, the dark undercurrents remained incredibly strong. He purposefully directed the comment and his warm smile entirely toward Natalie, prioritizing her comfort. Natalie forced a very polite, tight nod. As she did, she quickly noticed Vanessa overtly studying Ryan's wrist. He was wearing an exquisite, highly rare Swiss Timepiece, a watch easily worth more than some people's entire yearly salaries. Natalie felt a sharp twist of deep annoyance. She's probably mentally measuring his net worth the exact same way she originally sized up Ethan's bank accounts. Natalie thought with disgust. That sudden realization sparked a very faint, highly unexpected flicker of pity and empathy for Ethan. Had Vanessa only latched onto him just as soon as his financial star began to rapidly rise. Did she even care who he was as a man? Yet, was that fleeting empathy enough to ever overshadow the agonizing pain of his betrayal? Hardly. Vanessa took a very dainty, practiced sip of her vintage champagne. "Ryan," she began, faking a casual, breezy interest. "It's Ryan Whitaker, right? The famous CEO of Whitaker Boutique Hotels?" Ryan nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth tightening just a microscopic fraction, recognizing a climber when he saw one. "That's correct. Yes. And you must be currently forging quite an incredible path in the high fashion modeling world," Ryan offered politely, returning the conversational volley. Vanessa's long eyelashes fluttered coyly. "Oh, well, I certainly dabble in high-end print ads here and there for fun. But lately, I'm mostly entirely devoted to pursuing massive philanthropic causes with Ethan." She paused, dramatically, letting the heavy words sink deeply into the table, much like Natalie used to successfully do with Ethan when they were married. The verbal jab was highly subtle, but the underlying vicious message was crystal clear. "You're old news, Natalie. I've officially taken your place in his life and his philanthropy." Natalie's pale cheeks burned hotly with anger, but she maintained her absolute, ironclad composure. She fiercely refused to stoop down to the level of making catty, jealous remarks, even if her stomach violently churned with suppressed rage. Ryan, sensing her distress, gently and discreetly tapped Natalie's knee. Under the tablecloth, a very small, highly private gesture of solid reassurance. She appreciated the grounding touch significantly more than words could ever convey. Ethan, however, with his hypervigilance, immediately noticed the subtle, intimate movement under the table, and his dark eyes flashed with something closely akin to deep, agonizing regret. Had he foolishly, blindly pushed away the one person who genuinely, deeply cared about his soul, trading her in for a shallow woman who only seemed fully enthralled by his status, his watch, and his wealth? Desperate to regain control, he forcefully decided to redirect the conversation back to business, where he felt superior. "So, Ryan, I understand your conglomerate is aggressively expanding into Southeast Asia very soon. Managing that kind of international supply chain must be quite a massive, stressful undertaking." Ryan responded with absolute professional ease, seamlessly describing his vision for the new luxury hotels being built in Singapore and Hong Kong. He eloquently detailed the massive, community-based philanthropic programs his company fully sponsored for the local populations, and intelligently navigated the deep complexities of working across vastly different international cultures. Natalie enthusiastically chimed in, perfectly referencing her own extensive hands-on experience coordinating logistical events for a massive educational NGO operating in those exact same regions. Their intellectual synergy was glaringly evident to anyone watching, and a beautiful, highly natural camaraderie sparkled brightly between them. Listening to Natalie speak with such deep knowledge, intense passion, and fiery intelligence stirred a very odd, deep physical ache in Ethan's chest. She had absolutely always been incredibly bright and fiercely driven. Those were the exact qualities that had originally pulled him to her years ago. He painfully recalled how, in the very early, struggling days of their marriage, he had actually found her philanthropic zeal almost more captivating than her physical beauty. But his massive financial success had fundamentally changed his core values, and he suspected it had changed her too, though in vastly different, more profound ways. Vanessa, lacking the intellect to join the business conversation, acutely sensed Ethan's drifting distraction. She placed a highly manicured, possessive hand firmly on his forearm, flashing a blinding smile. Ethan's also been traveling internationally a lot lately. Haven't you, darling? He's actively looking into opening massive new tech offices in Dubai. She cast a very quick, calculating glance at Ryan's expensive watch, then directly at his face, desperately trying to gauge if the billionaire was appropriately impressed by her boyfriend's wealth. Ethan forced a tight, uncomfortable smile, highly reluctant to show any vulnerability in front of a rival alpha. Yes, Dubai. We've got some major, heavy-hitting investors over there right now. He tossed out a few highly rehearsed corporate remarks about his global tech expansions, but the usual arrogant spark of pride in his voice was completely absent. The conversation quickly lulled, dying on the vine, and the heavy tension remained thick and suffocating in the air between them. Then, highly unexpectedly, a man in a pristine tuxedo quickly approached their table. It was the restaurant's head maitre d', accompanied by a highly discreet, whispering staff member who murmured something urgent about a growing disturbance involving aggressive paparazzi gathering outside the main entrance. The maitre d' offered a very hushed, profound apology to the table, explaining that a few highly recognized faces dining in the restaurant tonight had unfortunately drawn unwanted, chaotic media attention to the front doors. Shall we discreetly move your party to a highly private, secured lounge in the back? He asked incredibly politely, his eyes darting professionally between the billionaire Ryan Whitaker and the millionaire Ethan Sinclair. We absolutely want to ensure your total privacy and the absolute safety of your guests. Natalie's heart skipped a terrifying beat. She intimately knew that any high-definition paparazzi photos of the four of them awkwardly dining together could easily spawn a massive, humiliating tabloid frenzy by morning. Ryan quickly glanced at her, perfectly reading her deep concern. "We'd greatly appreciate that move." "Thank you," he replied smoothly. The highly trained staff expertly guided the four of them away from the main dining room, leading them quickly through a dark side corridor and into a much more secluded, incredibly plush VIP lounge area entirely enclosed by heavy, soundproofing velvet curtains. A beautiful, grand piano stood silently in the dark corner, currently unoccupied, while incredibly soft, sultry jazz music piped in seamlessly through hidden, high-end speakers. The ambient lighting in the lounge was significantly dimmer, much more intimate, which paradoxically only served to heighten the terrible sense of emotional claustrophobia trapping them all together. Vanessa immediately perched herself exactly in the center of a plush velvet settee, smoothly crossing her long, bare legs elegantly, looking all too incredibly pleased with this highly exclusive VIP detour. Ethan stood stiffly by her side like a bodyguard, but he cast frequent, agonizing glances toward Natalie and Ryan, who comfortably seated themselves together on a nearby matching chaise lounge. The attentive staff quickly offered them fresh flutes of vintage champagne. Absolutely no one refused the alcohol. Each cold sip they took seemed to only sharpen the dangerous, emotional undercurrents violently coursing between them all. At long last, Ryan confidently broke the heavy silence. "Well, this certainly is highly unexpected," he managed a wry smile directed at Natalie, who returned a very slight, exhausted shrug. She desperately wanted to completely vanish into the floorboards, but she also felt a fierce, unspoken inner resolve to clearly show Ethan that she was absolutely not cowed or broken by his presence, nor by his flashy mistress. Vanessa, thriving on chaos, decided it was time to actively stir the pot once again. "You know, I distinctly recall reading all about your massive divorce settlement, Natalie. Very hush-hush legally, of course, but these messy things absolutely always leak to the press eventually, don't they?" Her highly inappropriate, invasive question was directed entirely at Ryan, acting exactly as though she were casually inviting him to wildly speculate on his dates. Financial history. Natalie instantly stiffened. Hot, blinding rage boiling just beneath her cool, frozen exterior. Ryan frowned deeply, his friendly demeanor vanishing instantly into CEO mode. "That is highly personal and entirely inappropriate, Miss Hayes," he said, his deep voice incredibly firm and cold. "I am absolutely sure that none of us here want to indulge in reading trashy tabloid gossip." Vanessa's painted lips parted into a very slow, highly calculating, cat-like smile. Her gaze flickered dangerously toward Ryan, evaluating his threat level, then snapped right back to Natalie, exactly as if she were rapidly calculating her next vicious move on a chessboard. She clearly thrived on creating spectacle, and Ethan could clearly see it in the highly amused, wicked glint shining in her eyes. "Oh, of course. My deepest apologies," Vanessa said. But the apology rang. Incredibly hollow and thinly veiled. Toxic sarcasm dripped heavily from every single syllable she spoke. Ethan felt an immediate, violent inward lurch of profound guilt and disgust in his stomach. Had he truly, willingly allowed someone so incredibly catty, vicious, and completely shallow into his private life? Had he really been so blind that he mistook her loud, brash confidence for actual intellectual depth? Had he mistaken her cheap, performative charm for real human substance? Yet, his massive, fragile male pride absolutely wouldn't let him publicly denounce her behavior right here in front of his rival Ryan and his ex-wife Natalie. Not yet. Instead, he clumsily attempted to redirect the highly toxic topic once again. "So, Ryan, how exactly do you manage to successfully balance having any kind of a personal life while constantly running a massive, global empire?" The desperate shift in conversation was incredibly transparent. But Ryan gracefully played along with effortless, diplomatic composure. Ryan responded with gracious, unwavering politeness, eloquently describing how he explicitly trusted his teams, successfully delegated massive tasks, remained in close, daily contact with his philanthropic boards, and heavily prioritized preserving his personal, quiet time away from the screens. Natalie listened to him speak, deeply reminded once again of the incredible, natural synergy between them. Philanthropy, ethical business, a deep, shared sense of human purpose. She cast a very fleeting, almost imperceptible glance over at Ethan. Her beautiful expression was entirely unreadable. Once upon a time, many years ago, they two had shared a grand, beautiful vision of building massive financial success strictly for a greater good. They had spent nights whispering excitedly about starting a global foundation together, about creating something so much bigger than themselves. But that pure, beautiful dream had been brutally, permanently buried beneath a mountain of his broken promises, his endless lies, and his entirely misplaced, greedy priorities. Now, absolutely all that remained between them was this odd, highly uncomfortable show of petty, corporate one-upmanship, the suffocating hush of the private lounge's intimacy offered them absolutely no escape from the violently swirling emotions. They sat and sipped their expensive champagne in silence, each one of them silently grappling with their own massive regrets, deep insecurities, or burning anger. And somewhere just outside the thick velvet curtains, aggressive paparazzi cameras flashed blindly into the night, desperately capturing fragmented, out-of-context pieces of the night's drama, just waiting for the tabloids to twist and turn into tomorrow's scandal. Inside the private, velvet-lined lounge, the heavy tension had fully crystallized into ice. Vanessa, utterly determined not to ever be overshadowed in any room by anyone, began to aggressively pepper Ryan with endless, vapid questions about his philanthropic efforts. She desperately tried to falsely align herself with him, making incredibly vague, sweeping claims about her own supposed charitable interests, mumbling something generic about children's education in Africa, though she horribly fumbled her words and looked panicked. When Ryan politely pressed her for specific foundation names or details, Ethan hovered awkwardly beside her on the settee, his mind violently churning. The stark contrast between the two women was glaring and undeniable. Ryan and Natalie spoke about these complex, global causes with absolute ease, with deep knowledge, and with genuine, burning purpose. Vanessa, on the exact other hand, treated the entire conversation exactly like a cheap theatrical performance, reciting a highly rehearsed, poorly written monologue she hadn't even quite managed to memorize properly. Ethan watched Vanessa stumble over her words, and he finally realized exactly how forced and entirely fake her entire personality seemed, especially when placed directly in comparison to the genuine, raw passion Natalie and Ryan authentically shared for these causes. It hit him then, a sharp, incredibly uncomfortable, devastating truth. Natalie hadn't just moved on from him. She had unequivocally, magnificently moved upward. And Ethan had simply moved sideways into a shallow puddle of wealth. Finally, sensing the conversation dying a painful death, Ryan stood up to his full height, offering a highly polite, dismissive bow of his head to the room. "I need just a moment to step out and speak privately to the maitre d' about ensuring our safe private exit," he explained calmly. Then, slowly turning to Natalie, his voice dropping to become noticeably softer and far more personal, he asked, "Would you care to join me outside for a moment?" It was a brilliant, highly tactical move. He desperately wanted to give her a polite out, a clean escape hatch from this incredibly claustrophobic, toxic arrangement. She eagerly accepted his hand, offering Ethan one last, utterly unreadable glance before quickly following Ryan out toward the main floor to find the maître d'. This left Ethan and Vanessa entirely, suffocatingly alone on the plush, velvet settee. The heavy, dead silence that immediately fell between them was thick enough to slice with a steak knife. Vanessa obliviously fiddled with her diamond-encrusted phone, acting exactly as though she were casually considering taking a quick, pouting selfie to digitally capture her glamorous VIP surroundings for her followers. Her perfect, highly contoured reflection shimmered brightly in the mirrored wall directly beside them. She was a woman perfectly styled, perfectly poised, and perfectly, entirely hollow inside. Ethan's dark thoughts swirled with a hurricane of massive regrets. He abruptly realized with sickening clarity that he absolutely didn't want to be in a relationship with a woman who only ever saw him as a walking wallet and a convenient stepping stone to Instagram fame. He had spent his life building a massive, global tech empire, yet somehow, In his personal life, he had willingly allowed himself to become nothing more than a shiny accessory in someone else's shallow ambitions. Yet, an ugly part of him had actively, willingly chosen this exact, destructive path. He had been so easily drawn to the superficial, easy allure of models and clubs when his marriage was failing because it required no emotional work. Impulsively, driven by a sudden, intense wave of self-loathing, he reached out and firmly pushed Vanessa's phone down into her lap, lowering the camera lens. No more pictures, please. For the very first time all night, his voice carried absolutely no fake pretense, no smooth corporate charm. It was just a quiet, exhausted, heavy finality. He muttered the words, staring at the floor. A quick flicker of genuine, ugly annoyance crossed Vanessa's perfectly sculpted features, but she begrudgingly complied, locking the screen. I just wanted to take one quick. I said, enough. Ethan's voice possessed a sudden, harsh edge that actually startled even himself. He immediately exhaled a long breath, forcing himself to remain calm. I'm sorry. It's just, this entire situation is highly complicated. Vanessa aggressively angled her body toward him on the couch, her eyes narrowing. Ethan, she said softly, reaching out and touching his arm with her acrylic nails, is physically seeing Natalie sitting here with that billionaire CEO messing with your head right now. He visibly twitched, incredibly uncomfortable with the blunt, invasive question. But Vanessa relentlessly pressed on. Look, Ethan, I completely get it. Seeing exes moving on can stir up old, complicated feelings, especially if they're currently doing significantly better financially than you expected them to be. But you need to remember, you're incredibly successful too. I'm right here by your side. Please don't let some boring, old flame completely overshadow what we have together. Her calculated words, which were likely meant to reassure his fragile ego, only served to drastically add to his internal, raging turmoil. He wasn't entirely sure what he actually had with Vanessa anymore. Yes, she liked the wild parties, the exclusive trips, the lavish, diamond-encrusted gifts. But did she genuinely care about him at all? Did she care about the flawed, human man hiding beneath the mountains of money? He painfully recalled Natalie's fierce, unwavering support during his chaotic, terrifying startup days. He remembered how she completely believed in his vision, long before the rest of the world even cared he existed. The massive, crashing wave of deep longing for that kind of unconditional love nearly choked him. He firmly but gently brushed Vanessa's hand entirely away from his arm. Let's just not discuss this right now. They'll be coming back soon, he forced. A very weak half-smile, but his dark eyes utterly betrayed his deep, internal conflict. Vanessa, absolutely not one to ever let her claimed territory be threatened by Another woman effectively concealed her rising frustration behind a poised, frozen facade. Across the lounge, near the curtained exit, Ryan and Natalie spoke quietly with the maitre d' about securing a back exit, while Ryan smoothly handled the security logistics. Natalie's anxious eyes darted back through the curtains toward the settee. She was highly anxious about leaving Ethan and Vanessa alone together, genuinely worried that Vanessa might use the time to stir up more petty drama before they left. Ryan noticed her distraction and unease. "Is absolutely everything all right?" She mustered a very small, tense, appreciative smile. "I'm totally fine. I never, ever expected to be dining in the same room with my ex-husband and his mistress tonight of all nights." Ryan exhaled a deep, highly sympathetic breath. "That is an awful lot to handle emotionally for one night. If you want, we can literally just leave right this second through the kitchen. I'm absolutely sure I can arrange a highly discreet, immediate exit to my car." Natalie deeply considered the tempting offer. She desperately craved an immediate escape to her quiet home. But something deep inside her newly healed soul also desperately wanted absolute, final closure, perhaps bravely facing Ethan and Vanessa one last time, completely unbothered, was a massive, necessary step toward her ultimate healing. "Let's just wrap this up gracefully," she finally decided, her voice firm. "We can walk back in, say our polite goodbyes, and then go." Ryan looked down at her, deeply admiring her incredible poise under fire. "You are significantly braver than you think you are," he murmured softly. She felt a beautiful, warm flutter of validation at his quiet, sincere praise. They slowly returned to the table, where Ethan had adopted a highly stiff, defensive posture standing next to the seated Vanessa. The ugly tension still lingered heavily in the air, exactly like a live static charge waiting for a spark. Natalie cleared her throat gently to announce their presence. "Well, I think Ryan and I will be heading out for the evening now. We both have a very early morning charity event to attend tomorrow," she said smoothly. Ethan nodded quickly, a highly confusing mixture of profound relief and an odd, deep disappointment warring in his chest. Vanessa aggressively pursed her lips, openly and rudely eyeing the fabric of Natalie's designer gown. Her cat-like gaze lingered just long enough to be intentionally dismissive, exactly as if she were silently, harshly critiquing every single inch of the silk fabric. What a terrible shame. The night's still so young. Are you absolutely sure you don't want to stay for a drink and catch up a bit more? Her tone dripped heavily with obvious sarcasm. She clearly seemed to deeply enjoy maliciously prodding at Natalie's discomfort. She was a literal viper wrapped in expensive silk, cruelly toying with what she thought was weak prey. Ryan smoothly interjected, his CEO voice returning in full force. "Natalie's extensive philanthropic schedule keeps her incredibly busy these days. We would absolutely hate to overstay our welcome." His carefully chosen words were impeccably polite, but his hard, commanding tone left absolutely no room for further argument. This conversation was definitively over. He slowly turned to Ethan, extending a firm hand one last time. It was highly interesting to finally meet you, Ethan. Best of luck to you with all your corporate expansions in Dubai. Ethan forced a tight, polite nod, shaking the hand. Yes. Likewise. Maybe we'll cross paths again in the city. The empty words felt completely hollow on his tongue, but he desperately tried to salvage some shred of his remaining dignity. He spoke exactly as if uttering corporate pleasantries could somehow magically undo the incredibly bitter, metallic taste currently flooding his mouth. Natalie, absolutely not trusting herself to speak a single word more than was strictly necessary for escape, simply offered the seated Vanessa a very cool, utterly detached smile. It wasn't forced. It wasn't a performative show. It was the specific kind of effortless, regal composure that made Vanessa's petty, jealous needling feel incredibly small and utterly insignificant. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Natalie said, fully mastering her composure, like a queen dismissing a peasant. Vanessa reciprocated with a highly saccharine, fake grin. Oh, we certainly will, she purred loudly, her long fingers aggressively tightening around Ethan's wrist exactly as if she were physically staking her claim on a piece of property. With that final exchange, Ryan placed a highly gentle, deeply reassuring hand at the small of Natalie's back, expertly guiding her away and through the lounges. Heavy velvet drapes. The physical touch was incredibly light and highly respectful. But to Ethan, standing there watching them leave, the gesture felt exactly like a burning, hot iron brand. It was a loud, silent, agonizing declaration to the world that she was absolutely no longer his to protect. No longer his to claim, and no longer his to love. A discreet staff member expertly led them through a maze of back hallways to a highly secured, private exit completely away from the flashing paparazzi cameras. As they finally slipped safely into the quiet luxury of the waiting elevator, Natalie breathed out a massive, shaky sigh of pure relief, her shoulders dropping 2 inches. Ryan stood beside her, quietly studying her beautiful profile. You are handling all of this chaos with truly remarkable grace, Natalie. I know it's absolutely not easy to do. She gave him a very wry, exhausted half-smile. Grace is usually just highly controlled panic disguised in a nice dress, she murmured. But I really, truly, appreciate you stepping in for me in there. If you weren't there by my side, I very well might have lost my cool and screamed. An unspoken, profound gratitude flickered warmly between them in the small space. It was a deep, mutual sense that Ryan was rapidly becoming significantly more than just a wealthy philanthropic partner or a casual dinner date. He might actually be a quiet, fiercely loyal ally in her long pursuit of healing and, maybe, Just maybe. Something much, much more. Meanwhile, back inside the suffocating, velvet-lined lounge, Ethan aggressively signaled the passing waitstaff to immediately bring him a very stiff, neat drink of scotch. Vanessa suggestively rubbed his tense shoulder in what she incorrectly deemed a highly comforting gesture. Well, I think that went incredibly well, she mused happily, lazily swirling the very last drops of her vintage champagne. She seemed a little bit rattled. By us, don't you think? Ethan didn't bother to answer her. He just stood there, staring blankly at the empty velvet corridor where Natalie had just completely disappeared from his life. A massive, violent emotional turmoil was actively roaring in his chest. Burning jealousy, crushing regret, and an oddly fierce, highly protective longing for the woman he had destroyed. He genuinely wasn't sure which specific feeling was causing the most agonizing pain. Vanessa, finally sensing his dark, brooding mood, cooed softly into his ear. Oh, darling, please don't dwell on your boring ex-wife tonight. We have a private flight to the beaches of St. Bart's very soon. Remember? Let's just focus entirely on us. Ethan finally tore his haunted gaze away from the velvet drapes, forcing a very tight, unconvincing half-smile. Us. The simple word felt incredibly foreign and highly toxic on his tongue. Vanessa visually represented absolutely everything he had once falsely thought he desperately wanted in life: endless excitement, total financial indulgence, and absolute freedom from responsibility. But now, standing here in the lingering, powerful echo of Natalie's dignified presence, absolutely all of it felt completely hollow and meaningless. Yeah. Us, he repeated numbly, but deeply buried in the very back of his troubled mind. Natalie's calm, beautifully poised face haunted his every thought. It was absolutely not the weeping, devastated face of the broken woman he had callously left behind a year ago. It was the radiant face of a powerful woman who had successfully, triumphantly moved forward entirely without him. He had once fully possessed her unwavering support, her brilliant mind, and her deep love. Now, she was happily forging a completely new, exciting path with a good man who clearly seemed to deeply appreciate every single aspect of her soul. And Ethan was left standing, alone in a crowded room, desperately wondering if he had ever truly, fully understood exactly what a priceless treasure he had so stupidly lost. The agonizing finality of it all gnawed violently at his conscience, a glaring, painful reminder of the massive, unfixable cracks he had foolishly allowed to form in his once promising marriage. As the lounge's low, sultry jazz tunes resumed their rhythm, two very different couples wrestled violently with their own unspoken truths. One pair happily left the shimmering, gilded walls entirely behind them, stepping confidently out into a vibrant city absolutely full of infinite, romantic possibility. The other pair remained permanently trapped in a shallow world that suddenly felt far, far too small. They remained heavily anchored to fake illusions of a glamorous life, deeply burdened by a rapidly growing, terrifying suspicion that everything around them glittered far less brightly than it did just hours before. The ruthless tabloids wasted absolutely no time fueling massive, wildly speculative gossip about the highly unusual four-way dinner encounter at Le Jardin. By the very next morning, all major social media platforms buzzed endlessly with high-definition paparazzi photos of the handsome Ryan Whitaker, protectively escorting a stunning Natalie Caldwell out of a discreet side door, while an uncomfortable-looking Ethan Sinclair and a glaring Vanessa Hayes lingered awkwardly behind in the shadows. Various gossip outlets eagerly spun their own highly dramatized narratives. Wealthy tech entrepreneur caught in highly awkward run-in with stunning ex-wife and billionaire hotel magnate. Or Vanessa Hayes' icy stare, jealous of CEO's flirtation with the former Mrs. Sinclair. Natalie woke up early to a buzzing phone, finding a long, endless string of text messages from society friends who either offered their breathless sympathy or desperately wanted to extract the juicy, behind-the-scenes details of the encounter. She responded to all of them highly politely, maintaining her grace, simply stating only that it was a totally random coincidence and that absolutely everyone had remained perfectly cordial. Deep down in her core, however, she could still physically feel the heavy, uncomfortable tension vibrating in her nerves. After grabbing a strong, hot cup of coffee, she doom-scrolled quickly through the flashy headlines, firmly vowing to herself not to let the ridiculous, shallow media circus drag her emotional state back into the dark pit of heartbreak. She was officially scheduled to meet Ryan at his massive corporate office later that very day to finally formalize their highly anticipated philanthropic partnership. Pausing briefly to look at her reflection in the antique hallway mirror, she carefully tucked a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. Taking a deep breath, she absolutely resolved to keep her strict professional composure intact today. Last night's incredibly messy, emotional entanglement wouldn't be allowed to overshadow her ultimate professional goals. An hour later, she arrived confidently at the Whitaker International Tower, a massive, gleaming glass and steel skyscraper that perfectly symbolized the sheer magnitude of Ryan's global empire. The executive, top-floor reception area boasted highly polished imported marble floors and carefully curated, minimalist art pieces that spoke of refined, old-money taste. A highly efficient, polite personal assistant immediately guided her down a quiet hallway to Ryan's massive, private meeting room. Given the high stakes of the meeting, she had fully expected a highly formal, stuffy atmosphere, but Ryan warmly greeted her at the door with a bright, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Natalie, thank you so much for coming in today. Please, let's sit down and get comfortable." For the next hour, they intensely discussed the planned logistics of the massive scholarship fund, the ethical distribution of financial resources, and a strict timeline for official press announcements. Despite the highly businesslike, data-driven topic, a warm, undeniable undercurrent of deep personal concern simmered just beneath the surface of their words. Eventually, as they closed their laptops, Ryan gently broached the elephant in the room. How are you holding up emotionally after the chaos of last night? I really hope the media hasn't swarmed your house this morning. Natalie sighed, a small, tired smile touching her lips. The hungry tabloids absolutely love to spin wild narratives to sell papers. But I'll manage the fallout. I really appreciate your unwavering support last night. It could have easily gotten incredibly ugly if you hadn't been sitting there. Ryan's handsome expression softened significantly. You know that you can always rely on me, Natalie. And I am genuinely sorry you had to face that kind of ambush. It is absolutely never easy running into a toxic ex, especially one with such a deeply complicated history. She gave him a slow, incredibly grateful nod. I am just extremely lucky I had a real, true friend by my side. The heavy word friend hung suspended in the quiet air of the office, and Ryan's hazel eyes flickered brightly with an unspoken, deep question. Natalie absolutely didn't miss the subtle, romantic nuance, but she honestly wasn't fully prepared to verbally define anything more serious just yet. Instead, she politely cleared her throat and gently returned the conversation to their philanthropic talk, feeling a chaotic, beautiful swirl of conflicting emotions inside her chest. Friendship? Or something significantly deeper? She simply needed more time to safely process her awakening feelings. On the exact opposite side of town, Ethan Sinclair sat alone and languished miserably in his massive, multi-million-dollar penthouse, completely ignoring the hundreds of urgent business emails piling up unread in his inbox. He was officially due to board a private jet to St. Bart's with Vanessa in exactly 3 days. But the prospect of the sunny, lavish vacation no longer thrilled him in the slightest. Instead of packing, he found himself endlessly replaying the stunning sight of Natalie happily sitting with Ryan Whitaker. She had seemed truly, authentically happy in a way she hadn't been with him in years. A massive, painful pang of deep regret hit him again, exactly like a physical gut punch. Vanessa obliviously swanned about the massive living room, loudly instructing the nervous house staff on exactly which expensive designer outfits to carefully pack for the island. Every now and then, she paused to try and superficially engage Ethan in her vanity. What do you honestly think of this new, tiny bathing suit? Or should I make sure to bring the massive diamond set you bought me last month for the yacht parties? He gave her very brief, half-hearted, monotone replies, which successfully stirred a rapidly growing, highly visible dissatisfaction within her. She acutely sensed that his heart absolutely wasn't in the upcoming trip. Finally, Losing her patience, she plumped herself down heavily on the plush leather couch. Directly beside him, aggressively crossing her arms over her chest. "Ethan, you have been acting incredibly moody and distant ever since we left Le Jardin last night," she said, narrowing her dark eyes at him suspiciously. "Is it about Natalie? Are you actually jealous of her or something pathetic like that?" His immediate, defensive knee-jerk reaction was to loudly deny it to her face. "I am absolutely not jealous," he said tightly, his jaw clenching. But even as the lie left his mouth, a loud, undeniable internal voice told him the exact opposite. He absolutely was highly envious of Ryan's unbothered, immense success. Sure, but he was also desperately, agonizingly jealous of the genuine, deep human connection Ryan and Natalie clearly seemed to share. I don't like how the trashy press is actively twisting things in the papers today." Vanessa huffed loudly, rolling her eyes. "Oh, just let the peasants talk. Who cares? We've got a private flight to a tropical paradise very soon. Just focus entirely on that." She stood up abruptly, haughtily tossing her long hair over her shoulder. "I absolutely need to go pick up some last-minute luxury items on Fifth Avenue. Join me?" Ethan slowly shook his head, expertly feigning being busy. "I can't. I have massive international conference calls." Highly disappointed, but fiercely unwilling to waste her entire day sitting indoors, Vanessa grabbed her designer bag and left him entirely alone. Ethan sat in the quiet penthouse and deeply mulled over the crushing irony of his life. He was the one who had proactively, aggressively ended his marriage, specifically to seek a supposedly freer, vastly more glamorous life. Now, sitting at the absolute pinnacle of wealth, he found himself feeling entirely unfulfilled, desperately craving something with far deeper meaning. He painfully recalled how a younger Natalie had once believed in him unconditionally. How they'd happily share late night, deep conversations about eventually using their massive wealth to make a real difference in the world. With the shallow Vanessa, those profound, meaningful discussions absolutely never arose unless they somehow directly served to boost a calculated PR angle for her Instagram. Impulsively, driven by a desperate need for clarity, Ethan grabbed his phone and rapidly scrolled down to a contact name he hadn't dared to use since the ugly days of the divorce, Jessica Morgan. Jessica was a highly intelligent, mutual friend from their past who had fiercely remained closer to Natalie after absolutely everything fell apart. Jessica was widely known in their circle for her brutally honest, level-headed advice. Perhaps Ethan just desperately needed to hear some truth from someone who truly understood the real Natalie. He hesitated for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen, then rapidly typed out a quick, vulnerable message. "Hey Jess, it's Ethan. I know it's been a very long while since we spoke. Could we please talk?" Agonizing seconds slowly turned into painful minutes. Just when he finally Assumed Jessica would rightfully ignore his text forever. A small reply popped up on his screen. This is highly unexpected. Are you okay? Ethan exhaled a shaky breath. He typed back honestly, not really. I desperately need some perspective. She responded a minute later with a very short, commanding directive. Meet me at the Bayview Cafe at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. Ethan set down the heavy phone on the coffee table, physically feeling a chaotic, massive swirl of both relief and sheer anxiety in his gut. Jessica was notoriously, brutally blunt. If he truly sought honest perspective from her, she'd absolutely give it to him, regardless of whether or not the truth was comfortable to hear. Still, he desperately wanted total clarity about his lingering, confusing feelings for Natalie, and the shallow reality of his current life with Vanessa. Something in his life absolutely had to give, or he seriously risked sinking much further into a dark pit of permanent regret. He slowly trudged over to the massive bedroom window, gazing out at the sprawling, glittering San Francisco skyline. He'd once found the sight of this city so incredibly thrilling, a kingdom waiting to be conquered. Now, each glimmering, towering building just seemed to actively mock him. Immense wealth and massive corporate success had simply never felt so completely hollow. And as the quiet hours slowly ticked by, a single, terrifying truth pressed heavily down on his chest. He might have foolishly lost something utterly priceless, and it might officially be far too late to ever reclaim it. The next afternoon, Ethan arrived exactly on time at the Bayview Cafe, a very cozy, unassuming spot located near the waterfront that typically bustled with young, hungry professionals on their lunch breaks. He quickly spotted Jessica Morgan sitting alone in a quiet corner booth, slowly sipping a hot latte. She was idly flipping through a fashion magazine, her wavy brown hair perfectly framing a face that was currently etched with deep, visible skepticism. When she finally caught sight of Ethan walking toward her, her lips instantly pressed into a very tight, hard line, neither offering a welcoming smile nor a hostile frown, but rather projecting a look of highly measured neutrality. Ethan nervously slid into the vinyl seat directly opposite her. The lingering, rich scent of roasting espresso beans grounded his panic somewhat, but his internal nerves still flickered wildly. Jessica calmly set the magazine aside, firmly crossing her arms over the table. You specifically texted that you needed some perspective, she began bluntly, offering no small talk. So, talk. He heavily rubbed his aching temples, desperately searching his mind for the right, honest words. I ran into Natalie last night at Le Jardin. Jessica's stoic expression absolutely didn't change a millimeter. She was dining with Ryan Whitaker, he explained, recounting the messy swirl of heavy tension, the highly forced, awkward conversation, and exactly how the encounter had instantly sparked a massive, unsettling wave of burning jealousy he hadn't foreseen. Jessica arched a highly critical eyebrow at him. Well, you aggressively ended the marriage, Ethan. Remember? If she's finally moved on with a good man, that's entirely within her rights. Ethan visibly winced at the harsh truth. I know that, Jess. It's really not that I don't want her to be happy. I truly do. But physically seeing them, sitting there together, made me suddenly realize that maybe I massively messed up my life. Ethan exhaled a long, shaky breath, nervously rubbing the back of his neck. The immense, crushing weight of his own spoken words settled heavily onto him, exactly like an overdue, massive reckoning. I never properly appreciated exactly what Natalie and I had. Jessica's sharp gaze narrowed, turning lethal. Let me take a wild guess here. Now that you finally see her sitting with a highly successful man who's possibly much more wealthy and significantly more philanthropic than you are, it's severely chafing your massive male ego. The pointed, highly accurate observation stung him deeply, not because it was unfair, but exactly because it was incredibly, uncomfortably accurate to his flaws. Ethan's broad shoulders physically slumped in defeat. I suppose so, he admitted very softly, looking down at the table. I absolutely hate the feeling of being overshadowed in a room. But it's so much more than just that, Jess. Natalie is absolutely not just some shiny trophy I can't have on my shelf anymore. She was incredibly real. He looked down at his hands, his voice growing thick with heavy regret. We actively built something beautiful together from nothing. It wasn't just about the money or the public appearances back then. It was a true, equal partnership. And I simply can't help but constantly wonder if I foolishly threw it all away far too easily for a mirage. Jessica studied his defeated face for a long, quiet moment, her fingernails rhythmically tapping against her ceramic coffee cup in quiet, judicial assessment. So, what about Vanessa? He hesitated, a look of mild disgust crossing his face. She's fun, he said. But the simple word felt incredibly hollow, even as it finally left his lips. I guess. But it's incredibly shallow. His voice lowered significantly, sounding almost exactly like he was finally, painfully admitting the dark truth to his own soul for the very first time. I finally realized that I've just been desperately trying to fill a massive, gaping void inside me with wild parties, extravagances, and endless noise. She's absolutely not interested in actually building anything meaningful in this world. At least not from what I can see. A long, heavy pause hung in the air. And honestly, Jess, I'm not even entirely sure if I ever actually loved her, or if I just deeply loved the intoxicating idea of not being alone when I was scared. Jessica snorted softly, shaking her head. Wow. Well, there's certainly a highly healthy, solid foundation for a lasting relationship. She leaned heavily back in her chair, her arms remaining crossed defensively. Look, Ethan, you already know that I firmly took Natalie's side after the messy divorce because I clearly saw exactly what you did to her soul. You callously left her completely wrecked. And you, she pointed a sharp, unwavering finger directly at his chest, were far too damn wrapped up in enjoying your shiny, new, millionaire lifestyle to even bother noticing the damage. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat dry, hearing the absolute truth put so brutally. Bluntly made his stomach physically churn with shame. Jessica's harsh voice finally softened just slightly, seeing his genuine pain. So, what exactly are you sitting here asking me today? Ethan? Are you asking me if you should try to somehow get her back? His throat tightened painfully. Would it even matter if I tried? He let out a dark, humorless laugh. She's publicly with Ryan Whitaker now. They look incredibly solid and happy. I absolutely don't want to selfishly sabotage her new happiness. Jessica took a very slow, deliberate sip of her latte, watching his reactions carefully over the rim of her cup. Natalie's a very smart, grown woman. She's completely done dealing with heartbreak. And I personally know that Ryan deeply respects her. She firmly set down her cup, meeting his intense gaze. If you actually want to try to reach out and reconnect with her, you had better be fully mentally prepared for the very real possibility that she might just reject you outright to your face, that she might happily choose Ryan over you, and that if she does choose him, you absolutely do not get to be bitter or angry about it. A massive pang of cold dread violently twisted in Ethan's chest. The terrifying thought of seeing Natalie completely slip away from him permanently wasn't something he was emotionally ready to accept. So, you just think I should quietly move on with my life? Jessica's expression was completely unreadable. I think you urgently need to figure out exactly what it is you truly want in life, and then figure out if you even deserve a second chance from her. She leaned in slightly over the table, her voice dropping. But let's be very, very clear here. Ethan, she owes you absolutely nothing. Jessica's voice was incredibly firm and utterly unwavering. If you're sitting here expecting some kind of easy, magical redemption arc where she falls into your arms, forget it right now. And if this sudden revelation is just about soothing your bruised, fragile ego, do us all a massive favor and just walk away from her forever right now. Ethan drew a very shaky, deep breath, feeling a profound mix of both deep gratitude and intense shame. Jessica had always possessed a highly unique way of cutting sharply through the absolute noise, of holding up a harsh, unforgiving mirror to his absolute worst, most toxic tendencies. This was exactly why he had asked her for perspective. You're totally right, he admitted, his voice very quiet. The heavy words felt exactly like swallowing broken glass in his throat, but they desperately needed to be said out loud. It's not just my ego. I deeply, profoundly regret exactly how I let my massive financial success completely overshadow what actually mattered in life. He let out a heavy breath, his hands tightening fiercely around the warm coffee cup. But I really don't want to be the villain in her life story anymore. Jessica's stern gaze finally softened into something oddly sympathetic. Then, you need to go talk to her, she said gently. Apologize to her completely, without any expectations of a reward. If there's absolutely any chance at all for a new chapter between you two, it has to start with total honesty. They spoke quietly for another half hour, deeply dissecting the complex, emotional mess of his life. As they prepared to leave, Jessica offered one final, heavy caution. Don't ever forget, Ethan, Ryan Whitaker is absolutely not just some casual, passing fling. He's an incredibly powerful, wealthy man who could easily give Natalie absolutely everything she once dreamed of having with you, entirely minus the toxic drama. The heavy words weighed heavily on Ethan's mind, but they also firmly crystallized his inner resolve. After Jessica left the cafe, Ethan lingered, alone in the booth for a long time, staring blankly down at the swirling foam in his entirely untouched coffee. He slowly pulled out his phone and typed a rapid message to his personal assistant. Cancel the upcoming St. Bart's trip with Vanessa entirely. Cancel the jet. If he was finally going to face the massive emotional chaos roaring within him, he desperately needed to stop cowardly running off to tropical, shallow distractions. Yet, how exactly would the explosive Vanessa react to being dumped? Probably with screaming fury. Or worse, calculating cunning. He would have to handle that massive fallout too. But first, he urgently needed to figure out a genuine, safe way to speak with Natalie. Perhaps he could invite her out to coffee, or even better, find a safe, totally neutral outdoor setting where they could talk entirely alone without pressure. He held absolutely no foolish illusions that a single, brief conversation could magically fix everything he broke. But it might be the highly necessary first step toward his own redemption, or their final, permanent closure. As he finally walked out of the cafe into the cool afternoon air, a faint, unexpected sense of mental clarity accompanied him. The city's loud hustle and bustle suddenly felt significantly less suffocating, sounding more like a beautiful symphony of new possibilities. He finally, truly realized that real, lasting success wasn't about having the absolute best VIP table at Le Jardin, or living in the flashiest, highest penthouse. It was entirely about forging deep, meaningful human connections, living a life with absolute integrity, and maybe, just maybe, finding a pure love that endured far beyond the shallow novelty of massive wealth. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, staring down at his phone, his heart pounding violently in his chest. The short text message he had just typed out felt entirely too raw, far too vulnerable to send. Natalie, it's Ethan. Could we please meet somewhere for coffee? Just to talk. No pressure. He hesitated for a long time, his thumb hovering nervously over the send button. Fresh memories of their disastrous last encounter at Le Jardin completely flooded his anxious mind, Natalie looking incredibly radiant, poised, and confident, with the handsome Ryan Whitaker standing protectively at her side. A massive, painful pang of dark jealousy and profound regret twisted violently inside his gut. But he knew that if he ever wanted to achieve any sense of true closure or beg for her forgiveness, he absolutely needed to take this terrifying step. Finally, holding his breath, he pressed send. To his absolute surprise, her short reply came buzzing back just minutes later. When and where? A massive wave of pure relief instantly blended with fresh, spiking nerves. He quickly proposed meeting at a quiet spot in Golden Gate Park the very next day. She texted back her agreement, her tone highly succinct and perfectly calm, giving away absolutely nothing about her current emotional state. That entire night, Ethan barely slept a wink, tossing and turning in his massive bed, his mind violently torn between faint hope and absolute, crushing dread. The following afternoon, bright, warm California sunlight beautifully illuminated the lush greenery of Golden Gate Park. Happy families picnicked lazily on the manicured grass, while dedicated joggers steadily circled the sparkling pond. Ethan deliberately chose a quiet, isolated wooden bench located near the grand fountain, where the clear water sprayed high into the air in graceful, catching arcs, clutching a hot latte that he was too nervous to actually taste. He anxiously scanned the passing crowd. Soon, he easily spotted Natalie approaching from down the path. The cool, crisp morning air carried the pleasant scent of freshly brewed coffee and damp earth. She was dressed casually, wearing a simple, elegant silk blouse and fitted jeans, exuding an understated, flawless elegance, the exact kind of effortless, natural grace that had absolutely always set her far apart from other women. Ethan immediately stood up as she reached the bench, his eyes frantically searching her beautiful face for any tiny sign of lingering warmth or forgiveness. "Thank you so much for coming today," he said softly, his voice full of nerves. She gracefully sat down on the far end of the wooden bench, highly deliberately, leaving a significant, physical space between them. "I'm honestly very curious why you wanted to meet," she replied, her voice remaining perfectly steady and highly controlled. Ethan inhaled a deep, fortifying breath. For a long moment, he thought of absolutely all the painful, unspoken regrets that had actively built up like poison in his veins in the long months since their messy divorce. Every single sleepless night staring at the ceiling, every weak moment he had falsely convinced himself he had successfully moved on, only to be brutally confronted by the quiet, deep ache in his chest that simply never left. "I desperately needed to apologize to you properly," he began, his voice breaking slightly. "I hurt you in terrible, unforgivable ways that I know I can't fully undo now. I foolishly let my massive success completely consume my soul." and I arrogantly took our beautiful marriage completely for granted. Natalie's dark gaze flickered away from his face, looking toward the spraying fountain. I appreciate hearing that, she said quietly, her slender fingers lightly tracing the cardboard edge of her coffee cup, exactly as if physically grounding herself to the moment. But apologies, no matter how sincere, can't magically erase absolutely everything that happened. He nodded quickly, accepting the blow. I know that. I'm absolutely not sitting here expecting you to magically forget what terrible things happened. Or to offer me another chance. I simply can't keep pretending to myself that I'm completely okay with exactly how we ended things. Seeing you looking so beautiful at Le Jardin, it completely shook me to my core. A heavy, profound silence settled thickly between them on the bench, punctuated only by the rhythmic splash of the fountain water. Ethan had absolutely always hated silence in his life. He was a fast-paced man of aggressive corporate deals, high-stakes negotiation, and rapid, fast solutions. But right here, sitting in this quiet moment with the woman he loved, there was absolutely nothing left to negotiate. There was only the smoking, tragic wreckage of exactly what he had lost. Natalie turned her head and studied his tired face carefully. She vividly remembered a time when they were happy, Brukenevlivitz, brimming with shared, massive dreams. She remembered late-night talks sitting on the floor over cheap Chinese takeout, the sweet, romantic way he used to write little love notes and secretly tuck them into the pages of her books. She remembered the good man who had once proudly held her hand in crowded rooms, long before he started, deliberately leaving her behind to chase money. But all those beautiful dreams had completely dissolved under the crushing, suffocating weight of Ethan's unchecked ambition. I'm absolutely not the exact same person I was back then, she said quietly, looking into his eyes. I've successfully built an entirely new life for myself. I'm working passionately with charities. And, well, I am connecting deeply with Ryan. A sharp, painful flicker of intense jealousy aggressively crossed Ethan's features, but he forcefully pushed it down, forcing a sad, wry smile. He certainly seems like a very good man. His voice was impressively even. But Natalie's sharp eyes caught the exact way his fingers curled slightly into tight fists resting on his lap. I truly want you to be happy, Natalie. I truly do. Natalie's eyes narrowed slightly, entirely uncertain whether she should actually believe him. So, why come tell me this now? Ethan exhaled a long breath, actively wrestling with the humiliating admission. Because I permanently ended things with Vanessa yesterday. She blinked rapidly, quietly absorbing that surprising piece of information. He hesitated, then looked directly, deeply at her. I literally woke up one day and finally realized that I'd completely surrounded my entire life with shallow, meaningless pursuits. I was standing in massive rooms full of beautiful people, Yet I felt completely and utterly alone in the world. It tragically took me far. Too long to finally see that I was desperately chasing something utterly meaningless. He glanced away, his voice thickening with raw emotion. But physically seeing you thriving, seeing you so passionate about your causes, it brutally reminded me exactly how far I had drifted away from the man I originally wanted to be. A cool gust of wind softly rustled through the tall trees, carrying away the heavy weight of words long unspoken. A massive storm of complex emotions violently churned in Natalie's chest, deep compassion for his pain, a heavy weariness from the past, and a lingering, dull grief for the life they lost. She gently cleared her throat. Ethan, I'm genuinely glad that you're finally realizing these important things about yourself, but it simply doesn't change our past. He swallowed hard, fighting back tears. I'm absolutely not asking for that. I just desperately wanted to own up to my massive mistakes, and to let you clearly know that I deeply admire the incredible woman you've become. If there's absolutely any way I can quietly support your charitable work financially, I'd really like to do that, even if we're never, ever together again. Her voice trembled slightly with emotion. Thank you, Ethan, Natalie said softly, the raw, bleeding sincerity in his words genuinely catching her completely off guard. That actually means significantly more to me than you. No. For a long, peaceful moment, they both fell entirely silent, each privately, recalling their better days, back before the brutal betrayal and the soul-crushing heartbreak. A gentle breeze lightly stirred the green leaves overhead, and the faint, happy laughter of children echoed from the other side of the park. Eventually, Natalie took a breath and spoke. I fully accept your apology, Ethan, but I am moving forward with my life. With or without Ryan, I've finally learned how to stand strongly on my own 2 feet. I truly hope you eventually find your own healthy path, too. He nodded slowly, his dark eyes shining bright with unshed, painful tears. That's honestly all I ever wanted today, a chance to finally make amends. Even if it's just with words. Thank you so much for hearing me out. They both slowly rose from the wooden bench, their coffees sitting entirely untouched on the slats. She gave him a very small, incredibly wistful smile of farewell. Take good care of yourself, Ethan. He offered a highly hesitant, sad wave, then turned around to leave. Natalie stood there quietly, watching his broad shoulders merge slowly into the passing crowd, feeling entirely uncertain whether to feel a massive sense of relief or a deep, lingering nostalgia. The fountain's rhythmic, spraying water glittered brightly in the afternoon sun as she finally exhaled a long breath, her heart feeling significantly lighter than it had in years. Maybe, at long last, they finally had the absolute closure they both desperately needed. And maybe she was finally completely free to fully embrace her bright future, wherever it ultimately led. As the quiet weeks rapidly passed, the memory of the highly dramatic run-in at Le Jardin completely faded from the public chatter and the tabloid pages. Natalie Caldwell enthusiastically immersed herself even deeper into her demanding work at the NGO, meticulously orchestrating a massive, high-profile charity gala that boldly promised to deliver highly significant funds for global youth education. Each and every day, she woke up feeling vastly more assured of exactly who she was. She was absolutely no longer just Ethan Sinclair's tragic ex-wife, but a highly competent, deeply respected organizer and force in the global philanthropic world. She seldom thought of that bittersweet coffee meeting at Golden Gate Park, yet the deep conversation frequently lingered in the back of her mind. Ethan's highly genuine, tearful apology had officially given her a profound sense of total closure. He was absolutely no longer a looming, dark shadow of guilt or pain in her life. For once, she felt entirely free to joyfully explore new, exciting romantic possibilities, completely, without carrying any toxic emotional baggage. Ryan Whitaker's steady presence in her daily life also intensely magnified. They had happily continued closely collaborating on various charitable projects together, and with each and every professional interaction, she clearly saw significantly more of his incredibly sincere, solid character. He was massively wealthy, yes, but he was also deeply principled, highly ethical, and profoundly empathetic. Whenever she felt completely overwhelmed by the massive logistics of planning the event, Ryan was absolutely always there, offering highly practical business advice, or even just offering a deeply comforting, warm hand resting on her tired shoulder. Slowly, beautifully, the rigid lines between their professional relationship and their personal feelings completely blurred. The highly anticipated day of the massive charity gala finally arrived. It was held in the glittering, historic ballroom of a legendary city hotel, and the event absolutely teemed with wealthy philanthropists, A-list celebrities, and key global influencers. Natalie proudly donned a stunning, custom-made, midnight blue designer gown, her dark hair elegantly swept up into a loose, romantic updo. She moved gracefully through the massive crowd with absolute confidence, expertly ensuring that every single tiny detail was flawlessly executed. The high-end silent auction, the prominent keynote speakers, and the sumptuous, multi-course dinner service. When the program officially began on stage, Natalie proudly stepped up to the microphone and introduced Ryan to the crowd for his keynote speech about the massive global impact of strategic, ethical giving. His powerful, eloquent words resonated deeply with the wealthy audience, beautifully underscoring exactly how massive corporate wealth could become a vital, life-saving tool for true societal good. When the formal program finally ended, Ryan actively sought out and found Natalie amid the swirling, dancing guests. He gently took her hand and guided her away from the noise to a much quieter, secluded alcove lined with tall, arched windows overlooking the glittering city lights below. "You did an absolutely outstanding job tonight," he said softly, his deep voice radiating warm pride. "We significantly surpassed our ultimate fundraising goal. By millions." She exhaled a long breath, the thrilling adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I'm so incredibly relieved and absolutely thrilled. Thank you so much for all your unwavering support, Ryan. Without your hotel group's massive corporate sponsorship, we simply wouldn't have ever reached these record-breaking numbers." He smiled a warm, breathtaking smile, stepping significantly closer into her personal space. "There's actually something very important I've been meaning to ask you." His tone noticeably softened, turning incredibly intimate. "When absolutely all of this gala chaos finally settles down, can I please take you out to dinner? A real, actual dinner. Not a working meal looking at spreadsheets, or a rushed, quick bite squeezed in between meetings." His hazel eyes brimmed with absolute, undeniable earnestness. Natalie felt her cheeks flush deeply with a warm, beautiful heat. After her traumatic, agonizing divorce, she'd firmly sworn off romance for a long while, highly hesitant to ever trust a powerful man again. But Ryan absolutely wasn't Ethan. He stood firmly before her, radiating with genuine, profound kindness, absolutely not just performing with shallow charm. She found herself smiling widely, nodding her head. "I'd really like that very much, Ryan." They sealed the beautiful promise with a soft, shared laugh, the quiet air between them heavily tinged with the thrilling promise of a new beginning. A massive sense of pure excitement fluttered like butterflies in Natalie's chest. Perhaps she was finally, truly ready for something significantly more than just professional camaraderie. Meanwhile, entirely across the city, far away from the flashing cameras and gala lights, Ethan Sinclair stood quietly in the dark in front of a very modest brick community center in a lower-income neighborhood. He had very quietly, entirely anonymously, made a massive financial donation to the facility, fully funding brand new high-tech computers and advanced science kits for hundreds of underprivileged kids. It was exactly the kind of noble, grassroots cause he and Natalie had once dreamed of supporting together back when they were young and broke. Now, he took that beautiful dream forward entirely alone. Absolutely determined to find true meaning in giving back to the world. Watching through the window as the young children excitedly explored the newly equipped bright rooms brought a very rare, genuine smile to his tired face. He thought quietly about Natalie, wondering if she'd ever happened to hear about this specific part of his life. A small, hopeful part of him deeply hoped she would, not because he wanted her public praise or validation, but simply for a subtle, quiet understanding between them that he was genuinely trying his absolute hardest to be the good man he should have been all along. Later that evening, Ethan returned to his massive, silent penthouse. It was completely quiet, Entirely absent were the loud, wild parties and the shallow, fake gatherings that had once constantly filled the rooms with noise. He prepared a very simple, quiet dinner for one, deeply reflecting on exactly how drastically his life priorities had completely shifted. Vanessa Hayes was long gone, off to find the next lavish, glittering scene to conquer, presumably, and it was a very good riddance. Ethan finally realized that maybe being entirely alone for a while wasn't so terrible, especially if he could successfully fill the massive emptiness in his soul with true purpose, whether through quiet, volunteer work, deep therapy, or slowly forging genuine, lasting friendships. Exactly 1 month after the highly successful gala, Natalie and Ryan sat closely together at a very intimate, candlelit corner table hidden inside a little-known, rustic French bistro. Unlike the flashy, ostentatieux le jardin, this quiet place had absolutely no aggressive paparazzi lurking outside. The charming bistro had no extravagant gold leaf decor, no massive crystal chandeliers, and absolutely no gold-plated menus. It simply offered incredibly soft, romantic lighting, truly excellent, hearty cuisine, warmth, authentic charm, and exactly the kind of quiet, safe atmosphere where real, deep conversations naturally flourished. Over hours of genuine laughter, fine wine, and shared personal stories, Natalie and Ryan happily discovered exactly how much their souls truly aligned. The romantic ease between them was completely undeniable. It was totally organic, entirely unforced. Their connection absolutely wasn't built on displaying high status or maintaining public appearances. It was built on something far, far rarer. It was built on something undeniably real. From sharing identical core values on ethical philanthropy to bonding over deep personal passions like global travel and reading classic literature, they constantly found beautiful synchronicities in the absolute smallest details of life. They bonded over the way they both greatly preferred receiving handwritten letters over cold emails, and the specific, comforting way a well-worn, physical book felt exactly like coming home. When they finally walked out of the warm bistro, holding hands tightly under the streetlights, Natalie felt an immense, beautiful lightness flood completely into her healed heart. It was absolutely not the frantic, fleeting, anxious rush of shallow infatuation, but the profound, steady, unbreakable calm of something incredibly solid. It was something truly worth building a life upon. She happily glanced up at the bright, moonlit sky, a quiet, peaceful smile tugging at her lips. Not so very long ago, she had stood shivering beneath the exact same dark sky, feeling utterly, hopelessly lost, feeling exactly as if her entire world had been shattered completely beyond any hope of repair. Remembering the agonizing heartbreak she once truly believed was insurmountable, she realized something profound. Perhaps a beautiful, fulfilling life truly could start entirely anew after suffering crushing, devastating disappointments. There, standing under the gentle, warm glow of the city streetlights, her hand wrapped safely in Ryan's, she realized with absolute certainty that she was absolutely no longer haunted by the dark ghosts of the past. She was no longer defined by exactly what she had tragically lost, but entirely defined by the incredible love she had finally found. She had successfully found a beautiful, fresh horizon, one entirely shaped by deep mutual respect, a renewed, fiery sense of purpose, and the thrilling, absolute possibility that this time around, true love might actually endure forever. Thank you all so incredibly much for joining us on this wild, emotional roller coaster of deep love, dark betrayal, and the ultimate, beautiful rediscovery of human purpose. Natalie's inspiring, triumphant journey profoundly reminds us that enduring, devastating heartbreak can actually lead to the most transformative, incredible personal growth. It teaches us that true, lasting wealth is absolutely not measured by eating lavish dinners or hoarding glittering possessions, but entirely by the unshakable strength of our human bonds, the deep, ethical depth of our character, and the immense courage it takes to finally walk away from exactly what no longer serves our highest good. Even when our dark past violently and unexpectedly collides with our present, exactly like it did for Natalie at that fateful, dramatic restaurant, we absolutely always have a powerful choice. We can choose to dwell miserably in the dark shadows of regret, or we can bravely choose to step forward into the bright light of something entirely new. If you were deeply captivated by Natalie, Ethan, and Ryan's incredible story today, please hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this dramatic video with your friends who absolutely love poignant, emotional, dramatic tales. And please, be sure to subscribe to our channel right now for more incredible stories that deeply explore the profound depths of true love, blinding ambition, and ultimate redemption. Your amazing engagement is exactly what keeps our channel thriving and growing every single day. What exactly would you have done if you were in Natalie's difficult place at the restaurant? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and we look forward to bringing you even more riveting, unforgettable drama very soon.